See you, God. Hello, all. Osha afternoon, good afternoon, and water. Thank you for watching. So this is day 14 of reading Black Rednecks and White Liberals by Thomas Sowell. And I'm still recovering from my cold or whatever that was. Anyway, where the Germans were the numerically predominant urban group, as they were for centuries in much of Eastern Europe, they could assimilate the local population, or at least its upwardly mobile elements, to the German culture. But where the Germans were greatly outnumbered, and especially where the great majority of the German immigrants, I thought, man, did I just read that wrong? I did not. Were male, then interactions among groups, including intermarriage, eroded the German culture. This was the case in much of the 19th century Australia, but not in South Australia, where whole families of Germans tended to settle together, and there were as many women as men, so that these communities could maintain their separate social and cultural identities for generations. It was much the same story in Brazil, where there was very little intermarriage with members of the local population living near German agricultural communities well into the 20th century, while in cities and in some rural areas where there were more diverse populations, acculturation and assimilation became more common. Yet even living in cities with large numbers of people from other backgrounds did not automatically lead to rapid assimilation. In New York City, where 90% of the population was non-German, in the early 20th century, most people of German ancestry nevertheless married other people of German ancestry. That changed over the years, but not immediately or rapidly. This cultural cohesiveness was seldom accompanied by political cohesiveness or group identity politics. Germans were usually not very politically active in any case, and they tended to be underrepresented among career politicians. I was kind of smiling because I thought of that on The Big Bang Theory, how they were doing like that podcast thing or whatever on flags, and they're like super duper awkward and stuff. And I'm sitting here wondering, like, do I really sound like how I sound to myself in my mind, right? Like in my head, how I can hear myself, I sound deeper and like hoarser, like, and like I have to like push air through and stuff. Anyway, when German political leaders arose in other countries, it was seldom as representatives of ethnic Germans in those countries. In the United States, for example, those people of German ancestry who did achieve prominence in politics, the Muhlenbergs, Muhlenbergs, in the 18th century, Karl Schurz, Schurz, and John Peter Altgeld, Altgeld, in the 19th, and Herbert Hoover and Dwight D. Eisenhower, in the 20th century, did so as representatives of the American people at large, rather than as spokesmen for ethnic German interests. There were similar patterns in other countries. In Australia, Germans tended to be underrepresented in politics, and those Germans who achieved political office were elected from constituencies where there were few Germans, as well as from constituencies. Oh, excuse me. Oh, they say it again. I thought I skipped a line backwards. As well as from constituencies where Germans were the predominant population. In Russia, the presence of Baltic Germans in high positions in the craziest, czarist, sorry, jeepers, I'm gonna make it, good grief, was of no benefit to the Volga, Volga Germans, or the Black Sea Germans, in whom these German officials took no interest, and whom they looked down on as peasants. I was gonna say peanuts. Look. Oh my God. I was like, I could do it. I slept really well last night. I could do this. Anyway, I feel like I'm going down. In Brazil, Germans long remained politically apathetic until after the Second World War, when they began to elect more deputies. However, in places where the German minority was under sustained political was under sustained political attack. Oh, yeah, man. Such as by the Latvians or the Czechs, Germans were provoked into political activity. The persistence of German culture did not, in most cases, mean making public dramatizations of a separate identity, exceptions again being in places like Czechoslovakia. More commonly, Germans maintained their culture without making a public issue of it. In the United States, such American sports icons as Babe Ruth and Lou Gehrig grew up speaking German, and so did Nobel Prize-winning economist George Stigler, Stigler. Education. Among the things that Germans had in common, wherever they were from and wherever they settled, was making education a high priority. Even among German farmers pioneering in the wilderness of 19th century Brazil, German schools appeared in the first clearings in the woods, while most native-born Brazilians remained illiterate on into the 20th century. This reflected the high priority of education among Germans in Europe, where the term kindergarten originated, and where the German research-oriented and doctorate-granting university became the model for modern American universities. Education was not just for intellectuals or academics, however. German farmers and craftsmen learned to read and write, even in times and places where the surrounding population was illiterate, as in most of Eastern Europe and in Brazil. Education became the foundation for German prominence in the professions and in science and technology, both at home and abroad. In 19th century America, 1/3 of all the physicians in New York State were of German ancestry. As already noted, the Tsarist Russia Germans predominated in the St. Petersburg Academy of Sciences. In Argentina, German academics predominated in the Institute of Physics, Astronomical Laboratory, Natural History Museum, Natural Bureau of Mines and Geology, and in its Institute of Military Geography. The German nation. With the passing generations, the kinds of Germans who immigrated from their homeland changed, as that homeland itself changed. In the early 19th century, the small German states and principalities, which existed prior to their being consolidated into a nation in 1871, were a largely agrarian, agrarian world in which 3/4 of the population lived in small villages and towns. Its manufactured goods, such as textiles and metal products, were produced largely by artisans and craftsmen rather than by large-scale industrial enterprises, such as were developing in Britain, Britain, while Germans were economically more advanced than the peoples of Eastern Europe. They lagged behind other countries in Western Europe in technology and in sophisticated commercial and financial institutions. But all of that changed during the course of the 19th century. At first, the Germans simply borrowed the more advanced methods of the British in industry and agriculture. Britons, Britons, installed industrial equipment and built railroads in Germany and taught Germans how to operate both. British capital financed the industrial production of wool and helped create the German steel industry, with Belgians and the French also contributing technology to German economic development. Yet once launched into the industrial age, the Germans surpassed their mentors. Before the end of the 19th century, the number of German steam engines tripled between 1834 and 1850, and between 1815 and 1850. That's 1815 and 1850. Sometimes they sound similar. Coal production increased more than tenfold. Germans had nearly double the railroad mileage of the French by the middle of the 19th century. In the crucial area of steel production, Germany overtook, I spared you that yawn. It's like the third or fourth one. Britain by the last decade of the 19th century, and on the eve of the First World War, German steel production was double that of the British. Political developments were equally dramatic. When the German states and principalities were consolidated into a nation in 1871, it was the most economically advanced nation in Europe and militarily the most powerful, and as demonstrated in its crushing victory over France. That same year, and its seizing of the iron and coal deposits of Alsace Lorraine, Lorraine, strong nationalistic fervor accompanied these dramatic economic, political, and military developments, not only among Germans in Europe, but also as far away as Australia. German immigrants from the new era, when Germany reached the forefront of the industrial development, brought with them more industrial skills, more science and technology. Others took abroad artisan skills as before. While artisans and craftsmen were being superseded by modern industry in Germany, their skills were still in demand in other countries that had not yet reached that same level of technology. Germany's belated but dramatic emergence among the great powers of the world, like that of Japan in the same era, led to an aggressive nationalism that provoked armed conflicts with its neighbors. Although the First World War began with the Habsburg Empire's military action against Serbia in response to a Serb's assassination of their heir to the imperial throne, it was Germany's military backing and urging that led the Habsburg Empire to take that fatal step. With the full knowledge that existing alliances and alignments risk bringing Russia, France, and Britain into the war, the same nationalistic overconfidence which led to Germany's willingness to challenge these powers later led to the sinking of American ships bound for Britain, bringing the United States into the war, thereby tipping the military balance toward the defeat of Germany and the dismemberment of its allies, the Habsburg and Ottoman empires. The rise of Adolf Hitler to power in 1933 and his swift transformation of Germany into a militaristic and totalitarian dictatorship set the stage for a new and more bloody world war and, in the end, a more catastrophic defeat that now led to the dismemberment of Germany. While Germany rose from the rubble of wartime destruction to recover economically and eventually was reunited politically, the unprecedented horrors inflicted by the Nazis at home and abroad raised questions about the whole German culture and character that have not yet been put to rest in the 21st century. What the Nazis had done went far beyond launching a war. Their conscienceless persecutions at home and abroad, their racial fanaticism, and the murders of millions of unresisting civilians of both sexes and all ages reached unprecedented depths of depravity. As Time magazine commented after the collapse of that regime, this war was a revolution against the moral basis of civilization. It was conceived by the Nazis in conscious contempt for the life, dignity, and freedom of individual man, and deliberately prosecuted by means of slavery, starvation, and the mass destruction of non-combatants' lives. It was a revolution against the human soul. You know, that makes me think, you know how, like, I guess they were trying to achieve mass genocide. That was the end goal. And everybody's like, oh, that's wrong. That's so wrong, right? Why are people for the mass genocide of, like, the people that are looked down upon in Israel? I'm just asking. Or why are they trying to wipe out everybody who assimilates or associates with Hamas or whatever, right? Because you're blanketly saying that every one of those people is against whatever it is, right? Just like they did with the Jewish people. I mean, like, you can't separate it, right? And then the people who that was done to back then, the Jewish people, right? They're doing that to all of those other people. Kind of weird, right? I don't know, anyway. What did the Nazi era say about the German people who, after all, gave Hitler the electoral plurality that put him in power? How much of what the Nazis did reflected the culture and history of the German people? Political developments, the political freedom and individual rights, which are loosely characterized as democracy, had existed for less than a generation in Germany when Hitler came to power. Germany itself had existed for less than a century at that point, though there were Germanic states before, such as Prussia and the Holy Roman Empire, not to mention contemporary Austria, the remnant of the Habsburg Empire that had been ruled politically and dominated economically by people of German ancestry. Autocratic and authoritarian governments had long been the norm among Germans, as they had been across much of the world for most of history. Yet Hitler was more than just an autocratic ruler in a country with a militaristic tradition. What did putting Hitler in power say about the German people? Strictly speaking, it could reflect only on those Germans who voted Hitler into office in a democratic election, after which he seized dictatorial powers. Hitler never received a vote of majority of the citizens of Germany, even to be put into office as a chancellor, much less to become a dictator. The millions of Germans outside of Germany, of course, had no part in any of this. Yet, when all is said and done, there can be little question that Hitler's massive support in Germany reached levels of adoration, seldom seen in any country before or since. How much of that was support for the Nazi ideology or its known agenda, much less for its hidden agenda that unfolded later to shock and outrage the world? Yeah, really. While Hitler himself was even more ruthless and reckless than the Kaiser who led Germany into the First World War, there was among the German people no such exaltation at the launching of the Second World War as had existed in countries across Europe when the First World War began, with both sides full of confidence of quick and easy victories. William L. Shirer, S-H-I-R-E-R, monumental eyewitness history of Nazi Germany, described the scene in Berlin on the first day of World War II this way. The people in the streets, I noticed, were apathetic despite the immensity of the news which had greeted them from their radios and from the extra editions of the morning newspapers. Across the street from the Adlon Hotel, the morning shift of the laborers had gone to work on the new IG Farben, F-A-R-B-E-N, building, just as if nothing had happened. And when newsboys came by shouting their extras, no one laid down his tools to buy one. Perhaps it occurred to me, the German people were simply dazed at waking up on this first morning of September to find themselves in a war which they had been sure the Fuhrer somehow would avoid. They could not quite believe it, now that it had come. What a contrast. One could not help thinking, between this great apathy and the way the Germans had gone to war in 1914, then there had been a wild enthusiasm. The crowds in the streets had staged delirious demonstrations, tossed flowers at the marching troops, and frantically cheered the Kaiser and Supreme Warlord. Is it Wilhelm? They do W's, like, I don't know, like V's? Anyway, Wilhelm, W-I-L-H-E-L-M II. Hitler counted on no enthusiasm for war on the part of the German people. On the contrary, he proceeded his invasion of Poland, with elaborate charades of seeking peace in order to make it appear that the Poles had attacked Germany. Dang. He even staged border incidents using Germans in Polish uniforms to fire weapons and leaving concentration camp inmates dying as quote-unquote casualties of the purported Polish attacks. None of this was expected to fool the outside world. That it was considered necessary to fool the German people, insulated by a government-controlled press, suggests a serious difference between the aims and the values of the Nazis. Aims and values of the Nazis and the aims and values of the people whom they were leading and misleading. Differences between the goals and imperatives of the Nazis and those of the millions of Germans living outside the Reich were even clearer. The Volksdeutsch, Volksdeutschsche, as of 1935, there were an estimated 95 million Germans living in various countries around the world. 65 million in Germany itself, 6.5 million in Austria, 3.3 million in Czechoslovakia, and 1.2 million in the Soviet Union, as well as sizable numbers of Germans scattered through other European countries to the east and south of Germany. Many of these became involved politically with the German nation before and during the Nazi era in a way very different from that of people of German ancestry living in the Western Hemisphere of Australia. Living in the Western Hemisphere or Australia. In addition to those Germans who had settled in Eastern and Southern Europe in centuries past. Okay, I'm going to leave it there. Don't think I'm hanging again. Love you, mean it.